Here's my story for you all about reducing deforestation and promoting climate-smart cocoa here in Ghana. So I'm with Nature Conservation Research Center. We're a small environmental NGO. We're founded in Ghana. We're a Ghanaian organization. But we work primarily in West Africa and also in East Africa, Horn of Africa. Should I take this off? Okay. I'm not good at this stuff, you know. Okay. So we have projects here in Ghana. We have a big project in Ethiopia. We work in collaboration with partners in Kenya, looking at some things in Malawi, in a series of different countries. We are a strong advocate of community-based conservation, of natural resource management that involves multi-stakeholder collaborations. So you don't do things alone, you do it in partnerships. And our goal is to build sustainable communities and resource management systems for forest-dependent communities. So conservation should not be a burden on people. It should be a new way to have thriving and sustainable livelihoods and economies. So that's a little bit about NCRC and where I'm coming from. Like I said, we're small, but what I say is we punch above our weight. We punch above our belt. So today I want to, and welcome to those who are coming, I want to tell you a story of how we at NCRC have used multi-stakeholder working groups and a community-based natural resource management system to reduce deforestation, to improve local livelihoods, and to foster a whole new way of producing cocoa, a climate-smart cocoa production system. So what are we going to talk about? A little bit, let me give you context about natural resources and resource rights here in Ghana, because that context matters. I want to introduce you to this really cool mechanism called CREMA, which is Community Resource Management Area. I'm going to give you insights into the big problem of deforestation, and then share our process-based approach through multi-stakeholder platforms and working groups to define our solution, and then how we've moved forward in implementing that solution with a whole series of partners. So this is a big story. I could stand up here for 2 hours and probably tell you a lot more, but let me take you along this journey in the 30 minutes or so that we have, and hope that what you pick up today you can apply in other places and to other challenges. So background on Ghana and context. Ghana has very strong traditional authorities, indigenous leaders. There's over 70 ethnic groups here. I think this is common across the whole continent, a diversity of peoples and languages. Luckily for Ghana, we have a very high level of both religious tolerance, ethnic tolerance, a really rich natural resource base, from coastal plains, tropical high forest, woodland savanna, grassland savanna ecosystems. And Ghana is an exporter of gold, of cocoa, of timber, although that's declining precipitously, maize, shea nuts, amongst a whole set of other things. So lots of naturally produced resources and minerals that are exported. But we have a dilemma. We have a problem in the country. And what this is about is that while the indigenous traditional leaders own the land, families own the land, the people own the land, and the government maybe just about 5%, we virtually have no private land holdings. You know, the land my house is on is actually a lease, a 50 to 99-year lease. So the majority of lands are owned by the peoples themselves. But the economic rights to natural resources, the right to manage it, the right to use it economically, sit with the state. So it's my tree on my farm, but the Forestry Commission has the rights to that tree. And this is both inside of forest reserves and national parks, which is what we call the on-reserve, and outside of forest reserves and national parks, in the off-reserve. So no matter where you are, those economic resource rights sit with the government. and yet their management capacity is limited. Enforcement is extraordinarily weak in many situations. And so as a result, there's very few incentives for local people to manage their resources sustainably because they're not allowed to benefit from it. They don't have sort of the perception of, they don't own it in that sense. And so this has created over the decades a scenario where even if you nurture a tree, it naturally regenerates in your land, you're nurturing it in your farm, in 20 years' time, the Forestry Commission will sell a timber contract, a concessionary contract to a timber company, and they can come and log all the trees off your farm, and it's totally legal. So imagine how that feels when you're a farmer and you have a whole complex system and different crops and trees growing, and then you come back after maybe you've gone somewhere for a funeral and half those trees are gone because they're high-value timber species. Stinks. It's incredibly, it's a huge disincentive, right? But if you cut those trees down and burn them and you're clearing for agriculture, let's say you come to a patch of secondary forest that sits within your family's land, you have every right to clear it, to burn it, to cut it down, to plant more cocoa, to plant more oil palm, because that's good for agricultural production in the country. So this really limits communities and people's economic opportunities and their vision about how they should manage their natural resources. And as a result, we've seen a huge decline in wildlife and forest resources in Ghana over the last 50, 60 years as a result of illegal logging. So these disincentives create a whole set of illegal markets, right? People want to exploit, so they actually do things so-called illegally. So we've seen a big uptick in illegal logging and chainsawing. We've seen massive agricultural expansion, extensive bushmeat consumption and poaching. I like to say in East Africa, there's Southern Africa, lots of opportunities to see wildlife. Am I right? In Ghana, do you know where you'll find wildlife? In your soup. You'll find more wildlife in your soup than you'll find on a drive out. The forest reserves are largely empty. Okay, it's only in national parks. And we just have we have about 4 of those. So there's real decline, collapse almost in our natural resources. And then as many of you from Ghana here know, now we have the uptick in illegal mining. So there's a whole set of complexities on the ground stemming from these perverse user right system. And so let me ask a question, and I want a few of you to answer me. What needs to change in this context? What would you say from the top of your head? What would we change to foster a shift in how resources are used and to foster sustainability? Somebody just throw out a few ideas. Yeah. You have to yell.
Perhaps create more incentives for people to continue growing trees or crops.
Okay, more incentives to grow trees and crops. So what would those incentives be? So plans, yes, you're getting there. What else? Give me another idea. Let's go back to this slide here. Who owns the land? No, who owns the land? The people. But who has the rights to manage the resources? So what needs to change? Yes, the people should have ownership of the resources. Exactly. Communities and traditional indigenous leaders need to have the right to manage their forest and wildlife resources for their own benefits. And interestingly, the Nobel laureate in 2009, a woman named Elinor Ostrom, she wrote the book She's sort of the guru of managing the commons. How do you manage common pool resources sustainably? And she wrote a very simple, super interesting book about how communities around the world have managed their natural resources sustainably, financially, and ecologically over hundreds and thousands of years. And she won the Nobel Prize, and her argument is there's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning, are better at solving problems than the people on the spot who have the strongest incentive to get it right. So in Ghana, we need to be able to give communities and leaders the right to manage their natural resources. And that recognition in the early 2000s, with a series of learning trips from Ghana to Zimbabwe and South Africa, resulted in the establishment of something called Community Resource Management Areas, CREMA. Nobody knows we have this, but we have this really powerful tool. It started as a policy, and it's now slowly, we do law slowly in Ghana. Nothing here happens fast. Over 20 plus years, it's now set to become legislation. CREMA is a government-authorized, process-driven mechanism that enables rural communities to govern their natural resources for themselves, for their own benefit. So basically, it gives back the rights to the people and to the authorities. It facilitates landscape-level planning and management. It's founded, and this is really important, on traditional beliefs and values. If anybody's been to Upper West region in Ghana, on the border with Burkina Faso, the Black Volta River has the largest population of hippopotamus outside of a protected area in the country. And that's because in 1998, I believe, they started what became the precursor to a CREMA, protecting the hippos in that stretch of the river because they believed that their ancestors had been saved by hippos when they were running from a war in Burkina and Ivory Coast. That the hippos rose up, they ran across the backs of the hippos, and then the hippos went down and they were saved. And today you have, from a population of what was about 6 hippopotamus in that stretch of the Volta in the late 90s, you now have 136 plus hippos thriving in the CREMA designated areas and beyond to the north and south. So based on their traditional views and relationship to that animal, CREMA has given them the right to manage and protect and to benefit through ecotourism and a whole set of other initiatives. So CREMA is super powerful. And it creates this platform for green development, sustainable development, if you do it well, in a meaningful way. So let me put that do it well, right? There's some places where it works great, and there's other places if you don't have the right kind of buy-in and leadership, if you don't have the right type of partnerships, if you don't have support along the way, it's probably just a CREMA on paper, right? So it's about how you do things as much as what you're doing. And what I think is so cool when I was looking over the program for this event, CREMA basically embodies, what you're all talking about today, the Adinkra symbol, the value that embodies this AISA's gathering, Tikorong Koajina, 2 heads, or 1 head isn't a council, right? 2 heads are better than 1. Many heads are better than 1. When we work together, we can achieve a heck of a lot. And that's what CREMA is all about. So this is just a little schematic that gives you this concept. If you imagine you have a forest on the right side here, and then you have a set of communities in a landscape where they're growing cocoa and plantain and other crops, right? Every community creates a community resource management committee. And that committee is its purpose is to represent the diversity of that community. So you have a women's representative, you have a men's representative, you have a settlers representative if there are migrants from other places, you have the different religious representatives. You have the loggers representative. You have the traditional healer representative. You have the youth. So the community identifies their own demographic, their own diverse makeup. And then they select leaders out of those groups, and they sit on the Community Resource Management Committee. And every committee then selects 2 representatives, a man and a woman, at least the way NCRC does it. I put my foot down and say there will be women that are selected, because sometimes that's not always the case. And they become a board, the CREMA board, or the CREMA Executive Committee, representing all the communities, what is commonly a chieftaincy jurisdiction. So in Ghana, we have paramount chiefs. They come down to divisional chiefs and various sub-chiefs. So you find the jurisdictional area that makes sense for what you're trying to do and how big the lands are. And that becomes your CREMA body. And then they sit down to work on writing a constitution. What's their purpose? What's their mission? How are they structured? What are their rules? How long can a chairperson be chairperson, right? Everybody loves to be chairman. I'm the chairman. Well, can he stay chairman for 2 years, for 4 years, for 6 years? It's a whole deliberative process. After the Constitution, they write bylaws. They use their traditional values, and they write to reinforce the rules about how resources can and cannot be used and what the penalties are if you get it wrong. So it might not be, going to the police station. It might be if you cut shea trees in the north and we catch you, you have to pay 2 sheep, 300 CDs, and maybe a large bag, 50 kg bag of rice. And that's because that was decided by the CREMA body as it was discussed with the CRMCs. And that's the disincentive at that local level to dissuade people from doing what they shouldn't do. And once you have your bylaws, then you set a management plan. So where is your conservation zone? So here your conservation zone would be probably within the forest and edges of the forest, right? It might be along your river. What land use practices are allowed, what practices are not allowed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a process. It doesn't happen quickly. This can take a few years' time. You don't cook soup fast, right? If you put all the ingredients in soup in a microwave, it's probably not going to taste very good. You need to let the pot boil. You need to let ideas sort of simmer and sit, and even challenges come up, and then find ways to solve it. So the process is more important than the outcome, actually. And that process builds legitimacy. That's where you get your buy-in. That's where you have your debates and dialogue. So that's CREMA. Okay, so keep CREMA in your mind. Now we have a problem in Ghana, which I think is a problem or a situation that is common across the continent. Deforestation, okay? Because of these perverse user rights incentives, because people can't have the right to the trees on their farms, because they don't have access to the big forest reserves, et cetera, they start to use them makes sense, actually, but it's unsustainable ways. And what you can see here, this is Ghana's high forest zone. It's about 6 million hectares of land, this whole area right here in the country. The dark green color is the remaining intact forest as of 2015. And it largely overlaps our forest reserves and national parks. Everything outside of these protected areas, intact forest is largely gone. The light green color is degraded forest and in some cases shaded cocoa, okay? And then the pink, the bright red, and the maroon red are episodes of areas of deforestation in different time frames. So from 2000 to 2015, you can see the pink, red, maroon taking out a heck of a lot of forest and tree cover in Ghana. It's a big problem. Forest brings rainfall, right? Forest has pollinators. Forest is where we have biological diversity. So this is a threat both to the forest and the biodiversity, but it's a whole set of systemic changes that will threaten livelihoods and agriculture. And the biggest driver of deforestation in Ghana is agriculture. So agriculture is driving 83% of the high forest deforestation, okay? And in agriculture, cocoa farming, cacao, is the major driver within the agricultural context. And what's interesting here is, so think about, this is your cocoa in the orange. This is your just more general agriculture, okay? But I want to show you something. Cocoa farming starts with clearing the land. What do you notice in this picture? We're a bit too noisy here, I think, with the fans and such, but in this picture of a very young cocoa farm, just what do you see? Do you see any trees? No. So everything is cut. Do you know what this is? Has anybody seen a young cocoa tree before, a cocoa seedling? And what's above this cocoa seedling? Plantain. So most new cocoa farms are overshaded with plantain, cassava, maize, food crops. So even though we say 66% of deforestation is driven by food crop production, most of that will become cocoa. So it's 3 years of food crops, and then your cocoa tree has grown up, and you've transitioned into a cocoa farm. So it's a type of agroforestry, actually, right? It's a super smart thing to do, except there's no shade trees there. There's no diversity. So we went from a tropical forest. This photo was taken right on the edge of Kakum National Park in the central region. So you've gone from high diversity to just cocoa trees. Ghana is the second largest producer of cocoa beans in the world, after Cote d'Ivoire. It's an Amazon tree. It came to Ghana over 130 years ago, so it's not native, but it's been adapted into the cultural practice and into the systems. And it's historically based on creeping encroachment. Every year you do a bit more. Every year you clear a bit more, plant a bit more into forested lands. Forest lands have perceived to have the richest soils, and so that's the best place to plant cocoa. So we've seen this incremental expansion of cocoa, and right along with it, loss of our tropical high forest in the country. And you can see this incremental change in these remote sensing images that we put together in around 2011. This is in the western region, a place close to Seshwi-Riaso, Juabiso, Gosso, if those names ring any bells. It's right on the border with Ivory Coast. Who here is from Cote d'Ivoire? Anibilakro. So this is right across the border from Anibilakro. You can see in 1986, the dark green patches. This is Bia National Park. This is Bia North Forest Reserve. This is Krokrasua Hills Forest Reserve, which at that time still had chimpanzees. And then this is getting into Subim, Mayum, Bonsambepo, going up into Brangahafo. And yet when you go to 2000, you can see most of the forest in the off-reserve is becoming highly degraded or shaded cocoa. So this sort of, or unshaded cocoa, sorry. So it's really now, in 86, there was a lot of forest outside of protected areas. By 2000, that's virtually gone. And then by 2011, really severe encroachment into the national park and the forest reserves. And if you walk there, you're just walking through plantain that becomes cocoa. And I'm pretty sure those chimpanzees are now gone. Right? So this is over 25 years, we've lost a tremendous amount of the forest resource in this area has been heavily degraded and depleted and replaced with cocoa. So what are our current challenges with the crop, with cocoa production? And let me say, I love cocoa farms. I love cocoa farming. They're really interesting places to be. But when you look at the change over 100 years, it's wow, okay? Our big problem is expansion into forest reserves. Forest reserves are the last frontier of forest in this country that we have. Once those forest reserves are gone, as the Canadians say, we're hosed. All right? And yet, cocoa farmers actually have very low productivity. Ghana has some of the lowest yielding cocoa. Even though we're the second largest producer in the world, our production per hectare is one of the lowest. And there's been this dramatic loss of shade and trees on farm, driven by messaging that if you take off all your shade trees, your yields will go up, which is true in a short, for about 5 to 10 years. And then what will your yields do? They'll go down because the tree has sort of exhausted its metabolism and it's under more stress from sun and lack of rain and the changing climate. So the threat to cocoa from climate change is real. And that's what we're actually, if anybody is a cocoa wonk, we're experiencing right now. You read the news. Every time I turn on my phone in the morning, my Google feed tells me the crisis of cocoa in West Africa. There's not enough cocoa to buy. The chocolate companies are freaking out because we've had 2 years of La Nina, a climate event, a climate shock that has created too much rain. And too much rain is not good for cocoa. In the same way, El Nino, the opposite, is drought here in West Africa. That's also bad for cocoa. So whenever we have a climate shock year, production goes down, and we're having a crisis with that right now in the sector. And yet, cocoa production is hugely important to our economy. It's every year at least a $2 billion investment. It's massive. So cocoa production is in a really challenging place. And in 2011, I showed these slides at the World Cocoa Foundation meeting, and all the big chocolate companies were sitting there. And when I showed this, do you know what the response was after my presentation? Silence. Radio silence. It was like, shh. Nobody said anything. And you could sort of see them going, oh man, this is not a problem we want to know about. Nobody asked a single question, and we moved on. So that was the beginning of how we started to try to inform people and make change. And in the beginning, nobody was interested. Nobody wanted to hear about it. And one executive even told me, I don't give a about deforestation. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I bet you will. And he does now. So you can make change. Even in the beginning when people just ignore you, just keep at it. So where are we now? Looking at this whole sort of trajectory in history and the what do we do, traditional practices give us a way forward. Okay, if you look at how cocoa used to be grown in the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s, very different to today. All these two pictures here, they're both cocoa farms, but they look like forest. They're under heavy shade tree canopies, and it's basically a forest structure with your bottom structure is the cocoa trees. And we have that system here, we've just moved beyond it in many ways. So we call it shaded cocoa, we call it cocoa agroforestry, we call it climate smart cocoa. There's always a buzzword term, right? But this system of growing cocoa has the potential to help us solve a lot of the problem of deforestation. And so I call it the Back to the Future cocoa farming model. I'm probably too old. Have you guys seen the movie Back to the Future? It's so awesome. It's so fun to watch. I recommend it. So what might the benefits of a shaded cocoa system be? I'm going to challenge you to yell at me again. If you have shade trees in your cocoa farm, how might that help your cocoa? Somebody give me an idea. You got to yell really loud. Yeah. Yes, it fertilizes the soil. You get all the leaf litter falls to the ground, you're recycling. Very true. What's another benefit of shade trees in a cocoa system? Yeah.
We will be preserving the trees as well.
Yes, exactly. Biodiversity conservation. Exactly. And you know, many of those trees have actually value to them. There's nuts, there's seeds, there's botanical products, there's things people use in their local markets all the time. Give me one more. What's another benefit of these shade trees in the system? Why are we so hot today? Why am I perpetually sweating? Just shout it out. So yes, it produces oxygen. It also sequesters something. What does it sequester? CO2. CO2. Carbon sink. Kiara said it. It's a carbon sink. Climate change. Okay? These cocoa agroforests have as much carbon dioxide stored in them as your regular forest. 300, you can get up to 350 tons of CO2 per hectare. So they are sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it. And cocoa farms can grow for 60, 70, 80 years. So they're really important carbon sinks. And then they also produce rain. Trees transpire. And when you have transpiration with a whole set of trees, that's what generates the seeds of clouds. That's why we have rain. So I could go on and on. That's a whole presentation in itself, right? But the question is, how do we shift to this shaded cocoa agroforestry system? How do we get the buy-in? How do we make it happen with those chocolate industry guys, mostly, who said, I don't care about forest? How do you do that? And then how do you initiate change on the ground? Two very different trajectories. So our strategy was, let's invite them to lunch. When you have free pizza, everybody shows up, right? We did Chinese food, free Chinese food at our Chinese restaurant working group meetings over a year. And we invited private sector, public sector, NGOs, research, international, national, a whole range of stakeholders in the cocoa sector into a working group, a climate smart cocoa working group, a multi-stakeholder working group. And we would sit about every couple weeks and have lunch together. And we first asked ourselves the question, so we didn't come with answers. We said, is cocoa on a sustainable pathway? And then we set out a set of actions to come to the answer. And a few consultants, a few studies, looking at research, and what the working group determined was, no, cocoa is not on a sustainable pathway. And so we began a process where we drafted a strategy to increase yields sustainably and to reduce deforestation. And this slide could be the whole presentation I'm making today in and of itself. It's a whole process, but it's about committing to a process. You don't have to have the answer at the beginning. Commit to asking questions and looking for answers collectively and see where that can take you. And then you need champions. We found 2 champions, one in Forestry Commission and one in the Cocoa Board. You know, Cocoa Board and Forestry Commission used to hate each other. They would never talk to each other. Forestry Commission complains that cocoa is ruining our forest. Cocoa Board complains that Forestry Commission is logging all the trees off our farms. We got champions in each organization and brought them to the table, and they went back and sold the idea of working together within their institutions. And we did the same with the private sector. We got 2 private sector company champions. And through this process, we worked up to getting the highest level government approval from Forestry Commission, Cocoa Board, Office of the President, to support putting the program, this idea, this strategy, into the World Bank Carbon Fund, World Bank Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. Acronyms, don't worry about it. But a big fund to support efforts to reduce deforestation, improve livelihoods, sequester carbon dioxide, right? And so we did all that work. We got the go-ahead at the top level, and the companies were on board. The companies committed to no new deforestation in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And then they said, oh my God, how do we do that? Which is the perfect place to be. And so that's where I want to start to tell you as I wrap this up about how we moved from the big policy initiative. How do you shift a whole sector's thinking to then how do you implement something on the ground? Okay? And so we started in the central region around Kakum National Park in 2018 with the Kakum Cocoa Agroforestry Landscape Program. And this, you can't see it. It's a beautiful shot of, it's a drone image, or can you see it? Maybe I just can't at my angle. Okay, so this is a drone image of Kakum National Park is on your right, and on your left is the mosaic of cocoa farms, oil palm, food crops, the farming landscape. So this is Kakum and the surrounding landscape. A map here also shows it. There's over 250,000 people who live in this broader landscape, and the majority make a livelihood from forest and agriculture. Kakum has really unique biodiversity. It has one of the last small populations of forest elephants in Ghana. We've got lots of savanna elephants in the north, but forest elephants, there's about 200 left in Kakum, and they've got nowhere to go, totally isolated. So this is a mother and her baby that were caught on camera trap by the Wildlife Division. Kakum encompasses 5 traditional areas, very deep roots to the landscape and connection to the forest. And so, again, we said, who are the stakeholders? Who cares? We came together with the local community leaders. We came together with some of the companies working in that landscape, and I had the idea for how do we take this policy level program and adapt it to be implemented on the ground. And so our goal became to transform the Kakum cocoa forest landscape to a more sustainable and climate-smart cocoa system in which forest and biodiversity are protected, cocoa farmers and their families have improved livelihoods and empowerment, and we bring in socioeconomic and ecological resilience to climate change. So those were our goals. That's what we wanted to do in Kakum, and not me saying it, but the multi-stakeholder group. We keep doing these working groups. And then the local community said, we're gonna have a motto. And our motto is Yen Kwaye, Yen Koko, Yen Dachi. Who speaks Twi? We have to have a lot of Twi speakers here. What does Yen Kwaye, Yen Koko, Yen Dachi mean? Our forest, our cocoa, our future. So you are designing your future. They are also designing their future. And we started to work in 4 activity areas. Do you see how this overlaps with SDGs in many ways? Landscape governance, climate-smart cocoa agroforestry, landscape monitoring, farmer livelihoods. So we took thematic areas, and we put together activities that fall under each of them. So what I can say here is the way we started, okay? We had one chocolate company that wanted to ask more questions, the Hershey Company. They're the biggest chocolate producer in North America. And every week for 1 year before this program started, I had calls with the global manager for sustainability because she wanted to understand, why does forest matter? And why is landscape governance important? What does governance have to do with cocoa farming? She didn't get it, but she committed to, let's talk about this. And after 1 year of phone calls, it was a little bit insane. She gave me homework to do. She's like, okay, the next call, could you please come back and tell me this and this and this and this? And I was like, you're not even paying me. But after a year, they championed the program. They were the first company to come on board. And so they said, let's start to build the landscape, the natural resource governance system, the CREMAs, here, where their supply chain partners, Ecom, a commodity trader, have a lot of activities with cocoa farmers. And so we built 4 CREMAs, you can see them there, because there were 4 different indigenous stools, chieftaincies. And then Hershey, the Hershey woman, talked to the Lint woman and said, you should join us. And so Lint came and took the CREMAs at the top of Kakum, the red and the yellow. So women talking, they're competitors, but they have a relationship and they have pre-competitive partnerships, right? And so then Lint came and brought OFI, Olam, their commodity buyer. And then a few years later, Olam said, this is great. We want to bring in Ferrero. Ferrero Rocher, those little gold balls you buy for a horribly expensive price at the grocery store? So now Ferrero is sponsoring the western side, and then Hershey said, okay, and we'll fill the gap in the blue and the pink and the purple. So now we have 5 chocolate, even more than that now, chocolate companies. We're with Cocoa Board, Forestry Commission. We have a botanical processing company that's also joined, and we're working as a consortium of private sector, public sector, NGO partners to support Kakum. And this is what it looks like. We have a set of CREMAs that then are brought together into what we call, these areas are called HIAs, Cocoa and Forest Hotspot Intervention Areas, HIAs. And so we grouped them into sub-HIAs so that then Hershey can tell their story here and here, Lint can tell their story here, and Ferrero can tell their story here. So they all can work together, but they can still have independent success stories. And it's a pre-competitive sort of arrangement. And then that helps with management. So in the governance of the landscape, in the setting rules, in the enforcement, you have your CREMAs, then you come up to sub-HIA executive committees, and then we put in place a management board. And that management board works through an implementation committee with the partners. And we just completed this year, okay? So it's not easy. There's a lot of work to do, but over time we've built a structure, a collaborative structure for understanding, setting rules, monitoring, implementing activities, etc. And so constitutions have been drafted. We have our first ever, I think in Ghana, female CREMA executive chairperson. So Rebecca Anoff, she's a powerhouse. We have our implementation committee, our HIC, private sector and the community leaders. We have a sub-HIA. All these different bodies and people around the landscape are working together. And the companies are working on climate smart cocoa through their supply chains, how they source their beans, but also beyond. We've pushed them to go beyond because if you only do a few farmers, you don't make much of a difference. So the companies are working to improve yields, increase shade cover on farms, improve the cocoa planting material, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that cocoa agroforestry element sits within the responsibilities of the companies. We're working on it. How do you diversify livelihoods? So if you have farmers whose only income is from the cocoa tree, and then you have 40 different shade trees on their farm, some of those shade trees produce nuts, produce berries, produce fruits. And some of those also have economic value. It's just we didn't know about it. So there's this really cool tree. In Ghana, the scientific name is Pycnanthus angolensis. In Ghana, we call it otier. It looks like a messy bedroom. Its branches are all over the place. Its leaves are always eaten by insects. It's a really distinctive tree. It's a big tree. It produces a cluster of nuts in the dry season. And when you harvest them, so all naturally regenerated, by the grace of God, you just harvest them. You can dry them on your cocoa mats, and then it is processed into a butter very similar to shea butter, and it has anti-inflammatory and analgesic properties. So it reduces swelling and it reduces pain. And in the 80s and 90s, it was used on thoroughbred racehorses and their joints after racing. And now it's coming up as being this sought-after butter to put into lotions and pomades to help people, my aching back or puffy eyes or a whole set of things, right? So we have a company now buying the combo nuts off the landscape. And so farmers are getting money from their cacao, but also from their combo nut, their OTA nuts. And we're looking for, can we add 2 or 3 more products into that repertoire? So you have your cocoa income, you have your combo nut income, you have something else, all from one farm. Can we do, and then it incentivizes you to keep the trees standing. Then you don't have to cut them down illegally for timber and get a really low price. When we do that, just to say, the harvesters get about 9 CDs per kilo, and then we put 2 CDs into a trust fund. So all of these sub-HIAs now have trust funds, and the companies have invested seed money. So they're growing a trust of money that in perpetuity will be able to support their activities, okay? I'm probably getting short on my time. And then we're monitoring. We have community-based monitoring teams going out every year, doing farm surveys, doing forest surveys, bird surveys, household surveys, and we're collecting so much data, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, right? But data is powerful, and it's telling us how we're doing on healthy ecosystems, sustainable production, governance, and farmer well-being. And every year we have a report. And so to wrap this up, we're not done in Kakum. We're continuing to work there in our partnerships, but we now have a fully functional landscape governance system, 12 CREMAs, 4 sub-HIAs, over 120 communities, covering just under 100,000 hectares of forest and cocoa farming land. And it's all based on CREMA governance. So CREMAs, now they have the right to their resources. Really shifted things, because now we've seen, and I'm not joking, last week I started doing data analysis. By 2022, deforestation had stopped. Like, I get goosebumps thinking about it. I didn't think that would be the case. We have no new deforestation in Kakum. The forest is stabilized, and it's even now becoming a carbon sink. What was degraded areas have now been lost, and they're back to intact forest. And the forest reserves, we've seen deforestation reduce by 60% and degradation reduce by 70%. So something is working. The CREMA systems are working. I sort of say that, and I'm like looking behind my back, is it real? But we've done a whole set of remote sensing analysis. That's what it says. It's exciting. We've planted, the CREMAs have planted over 100,000 shade tree seedlings into farms. Farmers now have an average of 48 shade trees on their cocoa farms. 59% of the female farmers are adopting climate smart cocoa practices, and 45% of the men are. Because this program, Kakum, falls within the bigger program we launched and was adopted by the World Bank Carbon Fund, they just received $600,000 in carbon payments directly to the HIA Management Board. And they're now sharing those benefits to farmers, to communities and community development projects, and to the chiefs. And this will continue each year for a series of years. And we've seen cocoa production. Kakum used to be central region used to be a very low producing area. Cocoa production has come way up. 2021, we had the highest production they've ever had. And even in these last 2 La Nina years, when everybody else is crashing, production has remained stable. And we've seen an increase in yields for farmers, over just about 75 kg above the national average. And we've bought 20,000 tons of combo nuts. So lots of things are happening. We're making progress. There are still challenges, but this is our multi-stakeholder process. This is how bring people together, give people the rights, set some goals, and just get on with it. And you can start to, then one day you'll sit down with all your data and start to figure it out and say, holy smokes, Zuta flute, we've done something. And so this is my story and small inspiration for you all this morning as you set off on your thinking. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't have my phone, so I don't know what time it is. I've probably gone a little over, Madame Alpana, sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Rebecca, for this inspiring presentation. It's truly a pleasure having you here with us today. Kindly please stay on stage so we can extend a token of our appreciation from the AISA GISS team.